Morning. Hey guys, I'm Cliff. I'm one of the pastors here at New England Chapel. I am here to give you your lovely and awesome announcements. The first of which is we have one more serve day. And this serve day is very important. You're going to realize this on the next slide. This serve day is very important because the day after this serve day, we are going to be fully and completely open as a church. I know it, right? I'm very exciting. So one more chance to get this place spit polished. Do people still do that? Do people still polish at all? Is that still a thing? Okay. All right, so that'll be Saturday the 26th, which is not this coming Saturday, but the Saturday after that from 8:30 to 4. Don't worry, you don't have to stay the whole time if you don't want. You can do the morning, or you can do the afternoon, or if you like people, you can do both. So there's that. And then, all right, so we have a whole series of things building up toward opening day, which, as I say, is June 27th. The first one is actually this morning. And so if you would like to come pray with us for this church, stop watching, jump in your car. Actually, you could probably watch on your cell phone and drive over to the church, 300 East Central, and you can come pray with us in person. It's very exciting. So that is today, right after the service at 11 a.m. Next week, we're going to have a, how do we say this? It's going to be the inside story. It's going to be NECers, you all who have suffered and worn through all the COVID shutdown and folks who have been part of NEC for a long time. We wanted to have one service where it could just be us. And we're doing that, A, because we love you, and we want to see your faces, and B, because, well, if something goes terribly wrong, you already love us, and you won't yell at us. So that'll be great preparation for the 27th, and June 27th, shall be a day that will live in infamy in a good sense, because we'll be back together on the 27th, and later that day, we're also having the Youth Summer Nights kickoff from 1 to 4. Youth Summer Nights kickoff from 1 to 4. Josh, do we not know what night means? Anyway, that's it for announcements. Great to see you guys. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jeff Wiersma. I'm one of the band leaders here at New England Chapel. Just a quick disclaimer so we don't get sued. Cliff said if you wanted to come down and pray, you could watch on your cell phone and drive in your car. Please do not do those at the same time. All right, now that we've gotten that out of the way, we'll do our opening song this week, From This Valley.
To wash down over I am Greg Handel. I'm an elder here at NEC. I'm also a psychologist, and I mention that because it'll explain the stories that I tell, which you'll find out more about in a minute. But we're finishing a series on atomic habits, and today we're going to talk about prayer, but a specific type of prayer, what I call conferencing with God, or what is the difference between thinking over a subject or a topic or a matter or discussing it with God. And doing that takes a certain amount of faith because when you talk with God, you have to have faith that there's someone who's listening and someone who cares. And I like how Mike referred to it a couple weeks ago as looping God in. It's also important when conferencing God to realize that when you talk to God and He responds to you, He may tell you something different than you would have thought up yourself. Now, it makes a lot of sense because if God is God and He's omnipotent and He's all-knowing, then it makes a whole lot more sense to confer with someone who knows everything than to try to deal with something yourself when our knowledge of the universe is extremely limited. I'll give you an example. So when I graduated with my PhD, I did a postdoc at UMass, and my first job after that postdoc was working at Belchertown State School. Now, I don't know how many of you remember or know of Belchertown State School. It's been closed down for 30-some-odd years. But to say this place was a hellhole would be an understatement. The conditions were inhumane. The wards were often understaffed. Even when I started going there, they had gone through a lawsuit and did all these renovations, and it still was a horrible place to work, let alone a horrible place to live. And when I was there, it was home to 350 residents with intellectual disabilities. So I started working there, and I met a fellow named Daniel, not his real name, but we'll use the name Daniel. And Daniel was infamous throughout campus because what he would do is he would rip up his clothes, run around campus, kind of streaking around, half-dressed, and randomly attack people, just randomly hit people. And so his infamy kind of grew throughout campus. And shortly after he was assigned to me on my caseload, we found out there was going to be this meeting on what to do with Daniel. So in my preparation for this meeting, I started to read up on him. And I read his story. And his story went something like this. He was raised by alcoholic parents who couldn't handle him, so he was put into an orphanage run by nuns who treated him really well. And even though he had an intellectual disability, they were able to teach him how to read and write, at least at a 1 second grade level. And life was okay until his parents got divorced. And then his mom really wanted Daniel to live with her. Problem is she never stopped drinking, and she continued to drink heavily, so she brought Daniel home, but one night, and when she was really, really intoxicated, she stumbled, fell, hit her head, and died. So as the police came, they took Daniel and they put Daniel in Belchertown State School, where he stayed to that day. He had no explanation of what happened, no understanding of what went on. He was extremely bewildered and confused, and that led to anger, which led to the extreme behavior that we saw today. Or that day that I met him. So anyway, I go into the meeting, and the first thing I get is a call from my supervisor that he is going to accompany me to the meeting. I'm like, okay, that usually doesn't happen. I go to develop treatment plans at meetings all the time, but if you want to come, fine. I get there's 20 people at this meeting. Picture this is like one of those movies, a long table, 20 people. Now, you don't need 20 people at a meeting to do a treatment plan. So this is obviously more of a political meeting than anything else. And it's run by the superintendent, who is the head honcho of this whole campus. And back then, he was up in his office. He rarely ever came down from that high tower he was in. So for him to, something is going on here. And that something was obvious to me right from the get-go. This was not a meeting to clinically decide what to do about Daniel. They already decided. They were going to put him in a back ward, lock the door, throw away the key. Put him in isolation, that's it, end the game. And I'm watching this horrified. And, as I went through his bio, I see all this horrific stuff that happened, but there was no real treatment. He didn't get any way of trying to unraveling and have him explain and understand what went on and what. He was just this angry, angry man. No one ever tried to make it any different. So I'm watching this runaway train unfold in front of me, wondering, what am I going to do? So I started to pray, and I started to pray frantically. And I got to warn you, like I mentioned earlier, you start praying along those lines, you may be told something that you don't want to hear. What I was told is, you know that thing about no treatment? Bring that up in the meeting, okay? Now, here's the stage. There's 20 people there, 20 people who are probably all way more important than I am, just some guy who's just barely out of graduate school, right? Then superintendent is, I remember they sat me here because I was the treating psychologist, and on the other end of these 20 people, 10 seats, there's the superintendent looking right at me. And I raise my hand. And he looks at me. They all look at me like, don't you know you're not supposed to raise your hand? You're supposed to sit there, stay quiet, and let him tell you what you're going to do. But I raised my hand. He says, okay, Dr. Handel, do you have something to say? I said, yeah, I'm looking through the records. I noticed you hadn't really received a whole lot of treatment yet. My supervisor shot me a look that if looks could kill, I wouldn't be here telling you this story today. And all of a sudden, I said, well, it doesn't seem like we've done much to help change the situation. The superintendent looks at me and says, Dr. Handel, we've tried everything. We tried everything in the book and to no avail. But if you have a better idea, we're open to hear it right now. All of a sudden, thanks, God. Now, here I am, standing in front of all these people, basically criticize the superintendent to his face. I just committed professional suicide because I got to come up with a plan that I don't have. You got to give me something, God. I'm saying this quietly, right? I'm not saying this out loud. What happened was an idea. Say this. So I said it. And then they started asking me questions. And then answers started coming to my head. And we started having this back and forth. Well, God and them had this debate through me. I was kind of the conduit, right? And at the end, superintendent says, okay, Dr. Handel, you got 2 weeks. 2 weeks, we'll implement your plan, and we'll see if there's any results. Which, again, is also a joke. I mean, this guy's got years and years of all this horrible stuff happening to him, and we're going to undo it in 2 weeks. But fine, it's God's idea. We'll go with it, right? So here was the plan. The plan was this. I would go into his, and what he liked to do too is like to rip up his clothes and rip up his mattress and rip up things and throw it out on the tree outside his window. So when people walked by his, where he lived, the dorm where he lived, they would look up in horror, and he loved that kind of reaction. So I got in there, and I had this whole set of clothes, and I gave it to Daniel. I go, Daniel, like to get ice cream at the campus canteen later on this afternoon? You go, yeah. I go, okay. Well, here's some clothes, because obviously you don't have any clothes, and they don't let you in there unless you have clothes on. So I'll come back in a couple hours, and we'll go over there, but you got to make sure you have your clothes. And he goes, okay. So I left. I come back a couple hours later, and I knew as I was entering in the dorm, I saw the tree, and all his clothes were on the tree, so I knew what I was getting into. So I walked in, and I go, hey, Daniel, how you doing? Good. You want to get some ice cream? Yeah. Oh, wait. You don't have any clothes on. They're not going to let us in. I guess you really didn't want to go today. You know what? No problem. We'll try tomorrow. Next day I go in there, killing my clothes. Daniel, want to get ice cream? Yeah. Well, here's the clothes, but remember what happened yesterday? We couldn't go yesterday, so today you got to keep your clothes on. I'll come back in a couple hours. I came back in a couple hours. Guess what? He had his clothes on. Oh, Daniel, I guess you really want some ice cream. Well, let's go get some ice cream. And we did that, and he started wearing clothes. But then I kind of added to the pot a little bit. Oh, yeah, Daniel, how you go around and hit people? Well, people complaining, they're kind of afraid of you, so if you keep doing that, I'm not going to be able to take you to get ice cream. So guess what? He stops hitting people. But something else started happening. He and I would talk, and we became friends. And I asked him, what do you like to do? And he said, well, when I was with the nuns, sometimes we'd make stuff. What kind of stuff? I don't know, stuff like birdhouses. So they had a wood shop on campus. So I said, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you go, I'll bring you over to the workshop, and you can make something, and then I'll come and get you for ice cream afterwards. So next thing I know, he's going to the wood shop regularly. But now I don't have to take him for ice cream so much because he's making birdhouses and mailboxes, and I go over and he's showing me what he made, and he's all proud of himself. And all of a sudden, that extreme behavior started going away. So much so that one Thanksgiving, I invited Daniel over to our house. And my mom was going to be there. And my mom was deathly afraid of people with developmental disabilities before, I exposed her to people with that disability. And she knew Daniel was going to be there, but she didn't know anything about Daniel's past and his extreme behaviors in the past and all that. And at the end of Thanksgiving, she said, that Daniel is a lovely young man. His life was totally turned around because God put some ideas in my head, some ideas that I had never come up with on my own. Now, you could say, come on, Greg. Those ideas really did come from you. Yeah, maybe. Although I know me, some people work well under pressure. I don't. I work really well with calm, meditative music in the background. Everything's kind of just relaxed. Everything's just fine. That's how the best stuff comes out of me. But yeah, maybe, just maybe, I thought up this plan with all these people staring at me saying basically you're professionally dead, but maybe that wasn't God. Maybe that was me. But I'll tell you what, when that kind of thing happens over and over and over again in your life, you really start to realize there's my voice and there's God's voice. And you start to realize the difference. It's kind of like, how they say you can't leave the mafia, right? Because you just know too much. And I had a friend of mine who was in the ministry, and he was going through a really bad patch. Things weren't going right in the ministry. Things weren't going right in his personal life. And he had one of those dark days of his soul where he's just really lashing out to God and really getting kind of angry. And the thought came into his mind, why don't you denounce God? What has God ever done for you? Why don't you give it up? Give up this whole Christian life you're living. And he thought to himself, he goes, I can't do that. I know too much. I've seen too much. I heard too much. There's me and there's God, and they're two different voices. Part of the peace in all this is realizing that there's a voice that's different than you. There's a voice that's saying things that maybe you don't think about, but also things that maybe you don't necessarily want. And because of that, emotionally, sometimes it's hard to hear from God because he tells us things we don't necessarily want to hear. But another reason is because life happens, right? And life is just going through your head constantly. You're always thinking about things. And our default mode is to try to handle things ourselves. But in all of that, it's really important to stop and settle and think. Because we get busy, even in our prayer lives, of doing a lot of asking. I'll admit, I'll sit down and I just, in my morning devotional times, I'll just rattle off all the things that are wrong in my life and all the things that God's got to fix. And I got request after request after request. And then I'm done and I'm ready to go on with life, right? Where's my meetings? Where's my whatever, And every now and then God says, wait a minute, you didn't give me a chance to talk yet. Because that's where the rubber meets the road. Yeah, you can ask me all you want, that's fine, but if you're not waiting for my input, you're not going to see a whole lot of change. Now, one of the greatest examples of that was Jesus himself. Jesus is 100% God and 100% man. How is that possible? Mike will handle that in another sermon. I'll leave that to the guy with the theological degree, okay? Believe me, that it's possible, it's there, another sermon, another day, okay, whatever. But the point is this. being the Son of God and 100% God himself and knowing all things himself and having all that power that goes with being God, guess what? He took time to be alone with his Father in heaven, to discuss things with him, to not make decisions in a vacuum, to not make decisions by himself. He made all those decisions with his Father in heaven. Let's take a look at what the Scripture tells us. Now, these come from the Gospels that you've heard us say from here, that the Gospels are biographies written by either eyewitnesses of what happened or those people who interviewed the eyewitnesses of what they saw Jesus do. And we see Matthew, who is part of Jesus' inner circle and one of those apostles that was an eyewitness to what he did. And he wrote this in his gospel. After he had dismissed them, he went up, and he's talking about Jesus. After Jesus had dismissed them, the disciples, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And then later that night, he was there alone. He went off onto a mountainside and prayed, just him and the Father. Now we see that Mark writes in his gospel, very early in the morning, while still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went off to a solitary place where he prayed. A few chapters later, Mark continues, after leaving them, the disciples, Jesus went up onto a mountainside to pray. Luke documents the same thing. He says, but Jesus often withdrew to a lonely place and prayed. Later on, the next chapter, he goes, one of those days, Jesus went up to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. The point is this. We're not talking about an isolated incident like some big momentous event was about to occur and Jesus went to pray. We're going to talk about that in a second. But this was a regular occurrence that Jesus went off and he prayed to his Father. And out of those conversations was decided where he would go, when he would go, and what he would do when he got there. Now, this was kind of unnerving. As you read through these in the Gospels, you can see that his disciples and apostles, those people that were part of his inner circle, kind of got a little unnerved by this. Because after all, Jesus, you're the Messiah. You're like going to save us from the Romans. You're going to lead a revolution. Why are you drifting off onto this mountainside? Well, mountainsides are kind of pretty. You look out, you got a nice view. But why do you keep doing this and going off alone? We got work here to do. Kind of like us where, we don't have time to pray. I got work to do. Which is kind of nuts if you think about it. I have too much time to talk to the creator of the universe who knows everything and ask what's the best thing I should do about something I know very little about when it really comes down to it. Jesus got that. Jesus didn't make decisions on his own. He went off and he spent time and he prayed to the Father to make decisions about where he would go, when he would go there, and what would he do when he got there. Now, easier said than done, right? Because when you talk to God, is it okay, I got this idea in my head, but is it me or is it God? How do I know the difference? Well, I like the way, I heard a great analogy by this Christian musician, Mylon Lefevre. Mylon Lefevre, by the way, in his day, was a pretty known songwriter. Elvis Presley covered his songs. Alvin Lee from 10 Years After covered his songs. And I'm dating myself, but I know there's a couple of you out there who know who Alvin Lee is, so I feel good about that. But anyway, but he found Christ and gave up, I was going to say he gave up drugs and rock and roll. He gave up drugs, but not rock and roll. And so my wife and I went to see him at a concert in Boston. And as a lot of songwriters would do, they like to talk between songs and tell stories about their songs. And he was telling this one story about how he came to hear from God. And he realized it was kind of like talking on the telephone. Like if somebody calls you on the phone that you don't really talk to on a regular basis, they go, hello, and you go, hello, who is it? Right? And they tell you who it is. But if you talk to somebody on the phone every single day, after a while you go, hello, and you go, hey, Bobby, how you doing? Because you recognize the voice right away. I love doing this with my mom because I call on her phone right away. She goes, Gregory, how you doing? So good to hear your voice. And so I made it try to be harder and harder for her to recognize my voice. And I go, hi, just a simple word, hi. Hi, Gregory, how are you? So good to hear your voice. And I try to like, hey, just something quick, right? Hi, Gregory, so good to hear your voice. I'm like, how did she do that? I'm like, I'm giving her nothing. And she recognized my voice, but you just know that you know that you know. And after a while, that's what it's like to hear from God. You talk to him enough, and you just kind of know. So I often say, yeah, I know it's from God because the idea is just crazy. It's nuts. It's nothing that I would ever think of. It's also probably not something that I would want to do. Jesus experienced that too. Jesus experienced that the night before he would have to give up his life and die on the cross. We read Matthew's account in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Matthew writes, he, Jesus, fell on his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. This was critical. Jesus didn't want to put up with the shame, with the guilt. It's interesting that all those wrong things that we do in life, those turning our back on God and walking away from God, Jesus never did. In fact, he continually went to the Father, but he voluntarily would take on that shame, which means he would have to be separated from the Father for the first time of all existence, but he was willing to do that for us because his Father wanted him to. That is utterly amazing. It reminds me of a situation when I was confronted with something that I had to do that I definitely didn't want to do. And it was years ago. I remember my kids who were in their 30s were really young kids, but my wife and I were having this big fight before my leaving for work in the morning. And as most fights, we talk about, we remember the fight, we don't remember what we were fighting about, but whatever it was. I left the house and I slammed the front door so hard it felt like the house shook. I got in the car and I'm driving to work and I'm angry and I'm mad. And I'm realizing I got to go and I got to do counseling. Like, God, please, why? It's just too hard. You're asking too much of me. But I just started trying to settle down. Okay, think it through. What's my first appointment of the day? And I realized I had a marriage counseling appointment. Are you kidding me, God? I can't even run my own marriage. How am I going to tell someone else to do? That's it. I've had it. I'm not doing it. God, you're going to have to do it. Yep, you're going to have to do it. You got any big ideas, you're going to just have to tell me what to say. I was mad. So I get in the office, they come in, the couple's there, and they just start rattling off all the bad things in the life that the other spouse did to them, since the last time we met and all this is going on. And I'm like, okay, listen. They get done, they look at me. I look at them, right? God, I'm saying this silently. God, I'm not saying a thing. You're going to have to tell me what to say. Boom, an idea pops in my head. Oh, okay. I made a promise. I told him I'd say what he told me to say, so I'm going to say it. Sounds ridiculous. So I said what God told me to say. Boom, they start talking again. But this time, a little less combative. And they went on for another period of time, and then they looked at me. And I have nothing. God, oh, okay, there's another idea. I throw that out. So now they're talking again, but now they're not talking over each other. They're listening and talking, and this keeps going on where they start talking and they talk back at me, and I got nothing, and all of a sudden this, God, what do you got? And God gives me something, I give it back to them, and people ask me, what kind of school of psychology do you follow? And I said, well, this is the reason why psychologists have beards. I kind of go like this, and I look at the people, and I go, dear God, please tell me what to say, 'cause I have a clue. So if any of you got any counseling for me, no, I am clueless, and that's the good news. Whatever you got from God. I am telling you the truth, though. This story really did happen, and we're going back and forth. By the end of the session, they're crying, they're hugging, they're like, I love you, oh, go, Dr. Handel, you're the best thing, blah, blah, blah. And they leave. I get on the phone, honey, I'm so sorry, I love you. We're all a mess. We don't have a clue. None of us. But he does. There is the good news. There's the good news of the cross that allowed us to have this kind of fellowship with him where he wants to speak to us. But see, there's one other thing that might keep us from dialoguing with God. We may think we're not good enough. Greg, you don't know me. You don't know what I've done. God would not want to have anything to do with me. Well, I love the story that I heard Nicky Gumbel give, and Nicky Gumbel started the Alpha Ministry. Some of you may know that's not important. What is important is the essence of the story. And Nicky Gumbel talks about this man who had 2 pots, and he would hang the pots on either side of a pole that he would have holding on his shoulders, and he'd walk down to the river to fill up the pots with water to bring back to his house. Problem is, one of the pots was cracked, and it would leak water. So the pot, by the time he got back to the house, that pot was only half full of water. The other pot was still full. And this would go on for a while. Well, the one pot that was cracked, the crack pot, I love that. I relate to that. I'm the crack pot, right? The crack pot started feeling inferior, started feeling less of a pot. Realized the other pot was always full. I'm always half empty. I'm not pulling my weight. Why does this guy even have me hanging around? Why doesn't he replace me? Finally, that crack pot got the courage to ask the man, why am I still around here? Why didn't you get rid of me? I'm no good to you. The man said, you may not notice, but take a look. Flowers only grow on the side of the path that's your side of the path. I know your pot is cracked. I see that hole. So I planted seeds along that side of the path. So when we come back from the river, you're watering those seeds. And I've harvested those flowers, and they've decorated my home for years. I saw that you were broken, and I used you. This is the key. When we talk to God, we're talking to someone who could take our brokenness and use it better than we can. We're talking to someone who knows us better than we know ourselves and can take whatever it is, all that junk that we bring, and use it to create beautiful flowers that decorates the homes of other people's lives, that decorates other people's lives. The key is you got to talk to them. You got to believe that someone is there listening and that person cares. Let us pray. Lord God, we come to all before you and we're all broken pots. We just are. And there's nothing we can do to change it. But you can and you do. Lord, just take us. Use us. Fix us as you will, but use us the way we are. And Lord, let us hear that voice that gives us such comfort. That voice that's you. That voice that cares. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Greg. One of the things that Greg said that I really liked was about prayer being about transformation instead of a transaction. You know, if you buy something from somebody, you interact with them for a little bit, then you're off and on your way. But if you're being transformed and we're conferencing with God, like he said, then it's an ongoing dialogue. And that's sort of the gist of this song that we're going to do for our final song today, called Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. There's a light from the love of the Savior. the fold in that wonderful grace, and the things of earth will be renewed in the light of that glory and grace. Though our world can seem so lost and broken, life and grace are still breaking through. This truth can give hope when we feel hopeless, that God's love will make all things new. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, who is seen in every human face, and the things of earth will be renewed in the light of their glory and grace. In the light of their glory and grace. In the light of their glory and grace.
Thanks, Jeff. I didn't think you would stop singing. I just wanted to see how many verses you had left.
I was hoping I wasn't getting fired on the spot. I was hoping that wasn't, you were telling me to stop.
Hey, I saw the viewer count soar as the service went on, so I'm going to give a couple of those announcements because maybe a few dozen might have missed it. So next Sunday is a special Sunday. We're having a service, but it's really an in-house service. It's called Inside Story, and it's just our way to celebrate all that God has done through the last really 24 months, getting us to the point of a grand opening. So our grand opening service, everybody's welcome to attend on June 27th. Our in-house service, which will be boring for people who are first-timers, but great for insiders. All right, picture like when you're a kid and your uncles and father and aunts were all hanging around and just having a good time, sharing stories and laughing, and you didn't get any of the jokes. That's what it would be like for a new person showing up on the 20th. We don't want that to happen. So don't invite people on the 20th. This is probably the only time you'll hear a pastor say, don't come to church. Don't come to church. Don't tell people to come to church on the 20th. It's an inside story. And one cool thing about that service is we are going to be having communion, which I believe is the first time since like November 4th, 2019, right? Because we couldn't, we didn't have it in the auditorium, and then COVID hit, and we didn't have it together. So it'll be our first public communion in a service in over a year. So that'll be pretty cool. So Inside Story next Sunday, our first service, our first sort of opening kickoff on the 27th. Awesome message today. Thank you. And I pray that my prayer is that we just put it into practice, that we would expect God to show up in our thoughts, in our heart when we reach out to Him, when we look to Him, because that's exactly what He promised. So go in peace.